Andrew Johnson was a tailor. He was a tailor before he was president. This is a simple fact, but it tells a big story. It shaped who he was. It shaped what he believed. It shaped how he led. His life started hard, very hard. But he learned a trade. He worked with his hands. He knew what it felt like to earn a living with a needle and thread. This background stayed with him. It was a part of him even when he sat in the White House. He was the only president to come from this kind of working class trade. That makes his story unique. It makes his journey from a small tailor shop to the highest office remarkable. Andrew Johnson was born in Raleigh, North Carolina in 1808. His family was poor, really poor. His father, Jacob Johnson, worked different jobs. He was a hotel porter, a constable, a church sexton, but he died young. Andrew was only 3 years old when his father passed away. This left his mother, Mary McDonough Johnson, with almost nothing. She had 2 boys to raise, Andrew and his older brother, William. It was a struggle every day. They had no money. They had no land. They lived a hard life. Andrew did not go to school. He never learned to read or write properly as a child. This was common for poor kids back then. They had to work. There was no time for books. Instead, he learned how to survive. He learned how to watch and listen. These skills would serve him later. But first, he needed a way to make a living. When Andrew was about 13, his mother apprenticed him. She sent him to work for a tailor named James Selby. This was a common practice. A boy would live with the tailor. He would learn the trade. In return, the tailor would feed and house him. It was a way to get a skill. It was a way to get off the streets. Andrew went to work in Selby's shop. He started learning how to cut cloth. He learned how to stitch seams. He learned how to make clothes. Life as an apprentice was not easy. It was long hours. It was hard work. Selby was a strict master. There wasn't much freedom. One day, Andrew and his brother William, who was also apprenticed there, got into trouble. They had a run-in with some boys. Maybe they threw rocks. Maybe they broke something. The details are fuzzy now, but it was enough for them to fear punishment, so they ran away. They left Raleigh. They broke their apprenticeship contract. Running away was a big deal. Selby put out an advertisement. He offered a reward for their return, $10 for each boy. The ad described Andrew as having a round, chunky face and is very fleshy in his face. It also noted his dark hair and will be 16 years old in October next. This was a serious matter. An apprentice was bound to his master. Leaving was breaking the law. But Andrew and William did not go back. They kept moving. They went to Carthage, North Carolina, then to Lawrence, South Carolina. Andrew tried to find tailoring work. He worked for a short time, but the fear of being caught was always there. He knew he couldn't settle down until things cooled off. Eventually, his mother and stepfather, Caledonia Dowtrey, came with them. They were a family unit trying to find a fresh start. They traveled west. They were looking for a place where they could begin again. They heard about opportunities in Tennessee, so they kept moving. In 1826, they reached Greenville, Tennessee. It was a small town in eastern Tennessee. Andrew was about 18 years old. This was where he decided to stop. This was where he would try to make a life. He had his trade. He had his skills. He opened his own tailor shop. It wasn't fancy. It was simple, but it was his. He bought a house. It was small, a single room with a loft. He set up his shop in one corner. This was the start of something new. This was the foundation for everything that came after. He was a tailor, and in Greenville, that's what he was known as. He made clothes for the people of the town. He earned his living stitch by stitch. This early life, full of hardship and manual labor, deeply marked Andrew Johnson. He never forgot where he came from. Andrew Johnson's tailor shop in Greenville quickly became more than just a place to get clothes. Yes, it became a hub. It was where people gathered. They came to pick up suits. They came to get measurements. But they also came to talk. They talked about crops. They talked about local news. And they talked about politics. The tailor shop was like a barber shop or a general store. It was a place for community. Johnson was behind the counter, cutting fabric, stitching collars. But he was also listening. He was listening to the conversations. He was taking it all in. He heard what bothered people. He heard what they hoped for. This was his first taste of public opinion. He was learning about the world outside his immediate view. He also kept learning on his own. Remember, he never went to school. But he was smart. He was ambitious. He had a hunger for knowledge. He started to read. He asked people to read to him. He found books. He found newspapers. He slowly taught himself. A big part of this self-education came from his wife, Eliza McCardle. Andrew married Eliza in 1827, not long after he settled in Greenville. She was from a better-off family. She had some schooling. Eliza saw his drive. She saw his desire to learn. She helped him. She taught him to read better. She taught him to write. She would sit with him while he worked. She would read to him. He would repeat the words. She helped him with his spelling and grammar. This was a crucial partnership. Without Eliza, his path would have been much harder. He often called her his literary wife. The tailor shop became his university, as many would later say. He wasn't in a fancy college hall. He was surrounded by bolts of cloth and the hum of conversation. He was learning practical things. He was learning about people. He was learning how society worked. He was forming his own ideas. Johnson identified with the common man. He saw himself as one of them. He saw the struggle of working people. He saw the gap between the rich and the poor. And he didn't like it. He developed a strong dislike for the aristocracy. He saw them as privileged. He saw them as people who didn't work for their living. This view would stay with him his whole life. It became a core part of his political identity. As people talked politics in his shop, Johnson started to speak up. He shared his opinions, he argued, he debated. People respected his common sense. They respected his hard work. They knew he was one of them. He wasn't a lawyer or a plantation owner. He was a working man. This respect led to his first steps into local politics. In Greenville, people often met in the tailor shop. They would discuss town matters. They would decide who to elect for local offices. Johnson's voice was strong. His views resonated with his customers and neighbors. He became a natural leader among them. His first elected office was a humble one. In 1828, he was elected an alderman for Greenville. An alderman is like a town council member. It was a small job, but it was a start. He moved from the tailor's bench to the town hall. He was still making clothes, but now he was also helping run the town. 2 years later, in 1830, he became mayor of Greenville. He was still a young man, only 22. This shows how quickly he gained trust and influence in his community. He was doing well in his trade, his shop was successful, and now he was the mayor. He was balancing his tailoring business with his public duties. The tailor shop was more than a place of work for Andrew Johnson. It was his school, it was his forum, it was where his political career truly began. It taught him to listen, it taught him to think, it taught him to speak for the people he knew best, the mechanics, the farmers, the everyday working folks. He carried the lessons of that shop with him all the way to Washington. The smell of cloth, the sound of scissors, the chatter of customers, these were the sounds of his political awakening. Andrew Johnson's path from a humble tailor to a prominent statesman was not quick, but it was steady. After serving as an alderman and mayor of Greenville, he looked to bigger stages. His success in local politics showed him he could do more. He knew how to connect with people. He knew how to talk their language. In 1835, he ran for the Tennessee House of Representatives, and he won. This was a big jump. He was no longer just the mayor of a small town. He was a state legislator. He went to Nashville. He was now part of the state government. But he didn't forget where he came from. He never stopped talking about his tailor past. It was a badge of honor for him. He served in the State House for 2 terms. Then, in 1841, he was elected to the Tennessee State Senate. He was moving up. Each step showed his growing political power. He was building a base of support. He was making a name for himself across the state. The next big step was national politics. In 1843, Andrew Johnson was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. This meant going to Washington, D.C. This was a huge leap for a man who started with nothing. He was now on the national stage. He was among the most powerful people in the country. In Congress, Johnson continued to champion the common man. He often used the term plebeian to describe himself and his supporters. This was a direct contrast to the aristocrats he so disliked. He spoke out against privilege. He spoke out against big government spending that didn't help ordinary people. He pushed for things like the Homestead Act. This act gave public lands to settlers who would farm it. It was a way for poor families to own land. This was a very popular idea with his base. His tailor background was a constant theme in his speeches. He would often remind people he was a mechanic, he was a working man, he wasn't born into wealth or position, he earned everything he had. This resonated with many voters. It helped him stand out from other politicians. Many of his peers were lawyers, planters, or from wealthy families. Johnson was different. He was the tailor. He served 5 consecutive terms in the U.S. House. That's 10 years. This shows he was effective. He was able to get reelected over and over. People trusted him. That they saw him as someone who would fight for them. His views on slavery were complex. He lived in Tennessee, a slave state. He owned slaves himself. This is a fact of his life. But he also had a strong dislike for the wealthy plantation owners, the slavocracy. He saw them as another form of aristocracy. He opposed their power. He believed they held too much influence. He wasn't against slavery itself, but he was against the political dominance of the slave-owning elite. This internal conflict would play a role in later years. After a decade in the House, he set his sights higher. In 1853, he ran for governor of Tennessee, and he won. He served 2 terms as governor. As governor, he continued his populist agenda. He pushed for public education. He worked to reduce government debt. He was a strong voice for the everyday citizens of Tennessee, but he wasn't done yet. In 1857, he was elected to the U.S. Senate. This was the pinnacle of his legislative career. From a runaway tailor's apprentice to a U.S. Senator, it was an incredible journey. He was a powerful voice in the Senate, especially as tensions over slavery grew. He remained a Democrat. He was known for his fiery speeches. He was known for his strong opinions. Throughout his time in state and national politics, Andrew Johnson never shed his Tailor identity. He often made a point of telling people he was a mechanic. He once even made a suit for a friend while he was in Congress. It was a way to stay grounded. It was a way to remind himself and others of his roots. His past wasn't something to hide, it was something to be proud of. It was the source of his strength and his connection to the people he represented. He truly embodied the idea of a self-made man. The country was falling apart. The issue of slavery had finally reached a breaking point. States in the South began to secede from the Union. Tennessee, Andrew Johnson's home state, was one of them. This put him in a very difficult spot. He was a Southerner, he owned slaves, but he was also a fierce Unionist. He believed in the United States. He believed in the Constitution. While other Southern senators left Washington to join the Confederacy, Johnson stayed. He was the only senator from a ceding state to remain loyal to the Union. This took incredible courage. He was branded a traitor by his own state. His life was threatened, but he stood firm. He gave powerful speeches in the Senate defending the Union. He spoke against secession. He spoke against disunion. He became a symbol of Southern loyalty to the Union. President Abraham Lincoln noticed Johnson's loyalty. Lincoln was looking for ways to show that the war was not just about North versus South. It was about preserving the Union. Johnson, a Southern Democrat, was a perfect example of this. In 1862, after Union forces had recaptured parts of Tennessee, Lincoln appointed Johnson as the military governor of Tennessee. This was a critical role. His job was to bring Tennessee back into the Union. He had to set up a loyal government. He had to restore order. Johnson took to the task with his usual intensity. He was tough on Confederates. He confiscated their property. He demanded loyalty oaths, but he also worked hard to rebuild the state. He tried to heal the divisions even as the war raged on. His work as military governor further raised his profile. He was seen as a strong leader. He was seen as someone who could bridge divides. He was a Democrat, but he was working closely with the Republican president. This made him a unique figure in American politics. As the 1864 presidential election approached, Lincoln was looking for a running mate. His first vice president, Hannibal Hamlin, was a good man, but he was from Maine. Lincoln wanted to send a message of unity. He wanted a ticket that showed the country could come back together. He needed a Unionist Southerner. Andrew Johnson was the perfect choice. The Republican Party temporarily rebranded itself as the National Union Party for the election. This was to appeal to war Democrats and other Union supporters. Lincoln, a Republican, chose Johnson, a Democrat, as his vice presidential candidate. It was a bold move. It was a move designed to win the war and reunite the country. The campaign was hard, but the Lincoln-Johnson ticket won. They won big. Andrew Johnson, the tailor who ran away from an apprenticeship, was now the vice president-elect of the United States. It was an almost unbelievable rise. He had gone from making clothes to being one heartbeat away from the presidency. On March 4th, 1865, Andrew Johnson took the oath of office as vice president. It was a chaotic ceremony. Johnson was ill. He had been drinking to try and calm his nerves. His speech was rambling. It was not a good start. But he was there. He was vice president. Just over a month later, on April 14th, 1865, President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. The country was in shock. The war had just ended. The joy of victory turned to deep mourning. And in that moment, everything changed for Andrew Johnson. He was suddenly thrust into the presidency. On April 15th, 1865, in a simple ceremony in a hotel room, Andrew Johnson was sworn in as the 17th President of the United States. The tailor was now the president. The man who had stitched shirts and trousers was now charged with stitching a broken nation back together. It was an immense task. It was a burden no one could have truly prepared for. But Johnson, with his hardscrabble past and his unwavering belief in the common man, was ready to face it. He brought with him the lessons learned at the Tailor's bench, the resilience gained from hardship, and the determination forged in the fires of national disunion. Andrew Johnson became president at one of the most difficult times in American history. The Civil War was over, but the country was shattered. Lincoln's assassination left a void. The challenge was immense: how to rebuild the South, how to integrate millions of newly freed slaves, and how to heal a deeply divided nation. Johnson, the Tailor, now had to lead this process of reconstruction. From the start, his presidency was marked by conflict. His approach to Reconstruction clashed sharply with the Republican-controlled Congress. The Congress wanted to punish the South. They wanted to protect the rights of freed slaves. Johnson, while a Unionist, was also a Southerner and held racist views common for his era. He favored a more lenient approach to the former Confederate states. He believed in state rights. He wanted to quickly restore the Southern states to the Union, with less federal intervention. His Tailor background and the lessons he learned from it influenced his decisions. He continued to distrust elites. He viewed the radical Republicans in Congress as a new form of aristocracy. He believed they were trying to centralize power. He saw himself as standing up for the common white man of the South against the powerful forces in Washington. He held on to his populist roots. His public image was still tied to his past. He was often called the mechanic or the plebeian president. This was meant both as praise and as criticism. Supporters saw it as a sign of his authenticity. Critics used it to highlight what they saw as his lack of refinement or his stubbornness. But Johnson embraced it. He frequently invoked his working-class origins in his speeches. He reminded people that he rose from poverty. He spoke of his struggle. He used it to connect with ordinary Americans. The conflict with Congress grew worse. They passed laws to protect freed slaves. They passed laws to control the South. Johnson vetoed many of these laws. Congress often overrode his vetoes. The battle became personal. Congress passed the Tenure of Office Act. This law limited the president's power to remove cabinet members. Johnson believed it was unconstitutional. He wanted to test it. So he fired his Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, who was aligned with the radical Republicans. This act led directly to his impeachment. In 1868, the House of Representatives voted to impeach him. They charged him with high crimes and misdemeanors. It was the first time a president had ever been impeached. The trial moved to the Senate. The stakes were incredibly high. If convicted, Johnson would be removed from office. During the impeachment trial, his past as a tailor was sometimes brought up. It was used by his supporters to show he was a self-made man, not a corrupt politician. It was used by his detractors to imply he was uneducated or unfit for the presidency. But in the end, the Senate acquitted him. He survived by just one vote. It was a narrow escape. His presidency was deeply scarred by this battle. Despite the impeachment, Johnson completed his term. He left office in 1869. He returned to Tennessee, but he didn't retire from politics. That wasn't his way. He continued to speak out. He ran for various offices. He ran for the Senate again. He ran for the House. He had some defeats. But in 1875, he achieved another remarkable comeback. He was elected back to the U.S. Senate, making him the only former president to serve in the Senate after leaving the White House. This last victory showed his incredible resilience. It showed his enduring appeal to the people of Tennessee. He only served a few months, though. He died in July 1875 at the age of 66. Andrew Johnson's life is a testament to perseverance. He started as an orphaned, uneducated tailor's apprentice. He rose through every level of government, from alderman to mayor, to state representative, state senator, U.S. representative, governor, U.S. senator, vice president, and finally, president. His tailor background was not just a historical detail, it was central to his identity. It shaped his populism, it fueled his distrust of elites, it gave him a connection to the working class that few other presidents ever had. Even in death, his tailor's legacy endured. When he was buried, he was laid to rest with a copy of the U.S. Constitution under his head, wrapped in the American flag. But he was also buried wearing a suit he had made himself. It was a final, quiet nod to the trade that had taught him so much. The trade that had carried him from the dusty streets of Raleigh to the grandeur of the White House. Andrew Johnson, the tailor, was truly a unique figure in American history.